My husband told his mother in Korean that he had gotten my best friend pregnant. They had no idea that I understood the language perfectly. I grew up in Koreatown, Los Angeles. My neighbors were Korean, and my babysitter was Korean as well. By the time I turned 12, I spoke the language more fluently than some native speakers. When I married Mason 3 years ago, I never mentioned it. There wasn't a hidden reason. The topic simply never came up, and eventually it felt unnecessary to bring it up at all. During our first dinner with his parents, his mother made a remark in Korean about my very American style of cooking. I smiled politely and passed the rice across the table. She seemed satisfied with that response. Mason worked in tech. He earned good money, but worked long hours and was often busy. My best friend, Lauren, started visiting more frequently on the nights when he stayed late at the office. She usually brought wine. We watched movies, sat on the couch, and talked about ordinary things. We had known each other since high school, and she had stood beside me on my wedding day. I never had a reason to question anything. Everything changed on Thanksgiving. His parents flew in from Chicago. The house felt crowded and noisy with everyone there. I was standing at the sink washing dishes when I heard his mother lower her voice and ask in Korean, "When are you going to tell her?" I continued rinsing the plates. Mason answered, "After the holidays. Lauren is 12 weeks." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. Maybe the sound of the running water had distorted the words. Then his mother said, "This is a disaster. She seems like a good girl." Mason replied, "She is. That's why I have to handle this carefully. I don't want her walking away with everything." The glass slipped from my hand and shattered against the side of the sink. I blamed the soap. My hands were shaking, but my expression remained steady. I finished washing the dishes, dried my hands, and brought out dessert as if nothing had happened. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table with my laptop and created a new email address. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. Instead, I began preparing for the next 6 weeks. I became the best version of the wife he believed I was. I cooked Mason's favorite meals, I asked about his projects, I listened while he talked about work and nodded at the right moments. Every morning I kissed him goodbye as usual. I also invited Lauren to brunch. I helped her browse maternity clothes online. I even organized a small baby shower in my living room with soft blue decorations and a 3-tiered cake she had specifically requested in a voice message. "You're honestly the best friend I have," she said in that recording. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I saved that message, not because I intended to use it later, but because sometimes I needed to hear it again to remind myself exactly who had been sitting across from me all those weeks. Every text between them went into a folder. Every receipt I found, every time he claimed he was working late while his car was parked outside her building. I eventually hired a private investigator. Her name was Nicole. She was calm, efficient, and asked only the questions that truly mattered. 2 weeks later, she met me at a coffee shop downtown and handed me a thick envelope. I opened it immediately. Inside were photos with timestamps, hotel reservations dating back 8 months, his car parked outside Lauren's apartment at 11:18 p.m. on a Tuesday, and another photo of him leaving at 7:03 a.m. the next morning wearing the same jacket. I paid Nicole in cash. Before I stood up, she asked quietly, "Are you okay?" "Yes," I replied, and I meant it. The first 2 days after Thanksgiving had drained me completely. I had cried quietly in the shower. I had stared at the ceiling at 3 in the morning while he slept beside me, breathing deeply as if nothing in his life had changed. But after that, something shifted. I didn't feel stronger. I felt clear. At night, I lay beside him and counted his breathing. 1, 2, 3. He slept peacefully, completely unaware. He didn't know that while he slept, I was organizing everything by date. He didn't know that I had already spoken to an attorney and saved her number in my phone under a fake name. He didn't know that I had opened a new bank account 12 blocks from our apartment at a branch he would never visit because it wasn't along his usual route.
I planned everything while preparing his breakfast, while ironing his shirts, while tying ribbons on gift bags for Lauren's baby shower. Eventually, Lauren became careless. One afternoon, she sat on my couch, rubbing her stomach, and told me the father wanted to be involved, but needed to resolve his situation first. "That sounds responsible," I said calmly. "He seems like a good man." She glanced at our wedding photo on the mantel. "He really is," she said quietly. I smiled and poured her more tea. The week before Christmas, I decided it was time. I invited everyone to dinner at an Italian restaurant downtown: my parents, his parents, Lauren, and Mason. I gave each of them a different reason to come. I told my parents I wanted to celebrate the holidays early. I told his parents I had a surprise planned for their son. I texted Lauren, "I really need you tonight, please come." And I told Mason I had reserved the restaurant to celebrate our anniversary a few weeks early. No one asked questions. I arrived at 6:15. The reservation was at 7. I needed the extra time. I spoke with the host and adjusted the seating so my chair faced the entrance and the hallway leading to the restrooms. I preferred being able to see everyone as they arrived. The restaurant was called Bella Luci. Mason had taken me there on our first anniversary. I remember him asking me to close my eyes before handing me a necklace across the table. At the time, I believed I had married a thoughtful and dependable man. Now, I sat in the same place with legal documents inside my purse. Nicole had texted me earlier, "Everything's organized. Call if you need anything." I replied with a simple thank you and put my phone away. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't shaking. I had already lived through the hardest moment, the conversation at the sink. My parents arrived first at 6:50. My mother walked in wearing the beige coat I had given her last year. My father followed behind her, holding an umbrella, even though it wasn't raining. "What are we celebrating?" my mother asked as she sat down. "Just being together," I answered. 7 minutes later, Mason's parents arrived. Mrs. Hahn scanned the room before smiling. Mr. Hahn stayed close beside her. When I poured water into her glass, she looked directly at me. I held her gaze. She looked away first. Lauren arrived at 7:05, wearing a dark green dress that made her pregnancy obvious now. The gold earrings I had given her for her birthday reflected the light when she hugged me. "How are you?" she whispered. "Good," I replied. "Sit next to me." Mrs. Hahn's expression tightened briefly. Lauren didn't notice. Mason walked in last at 7:12, adjusting his jacket the way he always did when he was late. He saw me across the room and smiled. That smile used to reassure me. He greeted everyone and sat to my left. "Traffic was terrible," he said. He placed his hand on mine on the table. I let it stay there. The waiter came to take our orders. While we waited for the food, the table filled with small talk. December weather, Christmas plans, my father telling a story about a neighbor's tree falling onto the sidewalk. Everyone laughed. Mason looked relaxed, leaning back in his chair and talking about a project update his team had launched that week. He had no idea. For 3 weeks he hadn't suspected anything because I gave him no reason to. Lauren touched my arm. "You're quiet tonight," she said. "Is everything okay?" "I'm just thinking about how to begin," I replied. "Begin what?" "There's something I want to share with everyone," I said, loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Let's wait until the food arrives." My mother looked curious. Mason raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Hahn paused mid-sentence. The plates arrived. The waiter left. I picked up my wine glass. "I'd like to make a toast," I said. Everyone lifted their glasses. Lauren raised her sparkling water. "To the things you discover when you stop pretending you don't know them." There was a short pause. "Cheers," my mother said lightly. My father repeated it. The others followed. Mason drank without breaking eye contact. Lauren didn't. I set my glass down and opened my purse, pulling out 6 identical envelopes. One by one, I placed them in front of each person at the table. First my parents, then his parents, then Mason, and finally Lauren. "You won't understand yet. Let me explain first." I looked around the table. The sounds of the restaurant faded into the background. Plates clinking, quiet music, other conversations. I grew up in Koreatown, I began. My babysitter was Korean, and I learned the language as a child. By the time I was 12, I spoke the language more fluently than some native speakers. When I married Mason 3 years ago, I never mentioned it. There wasn't a hidden reason. The topic simply never came up, and eventually it felt unnecessary to bring it up at all. On Thanksgiving, while I was washing dishes in the kitchen, I heard a conversation in Korean. You asked him when he planned to tell her. He said after the holidays. He said Lauren was 12 weeks. I looked directly at Mrs. Han. You also said I seemed like a good girl, I continued, and he said that's why he needed to handle it carefully, because he didn't want me walking away with everything. My father slowly set his fork down. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she stayed silent. Mason's hand remained on the table.
My lawyer had predicted it accurately. Based on what I had explained, Mason did not handle situations well when he lost control. She was correct. Mason was most comfortable when he believed he was directing every outcome. When events moved beyond his influence, he became unsettled and rushed to regain balance. I left Rebecca's office with a list of additional documents to collect and a tentative schedule for the next steps. Instead of returning home immediately, I walked 3 blocks to a nearby cafe. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee that I barely noticed drinking. I considered what Mason might be doing at that moment, meeting his attorney, trying to reshape the story so he would not appear fully responsible. I imagined him calling his mother for guidance. I also thought about Lauren, likely waiting to understand what role she would have in his future. Surprisingly, I did not feel anger. What I felt was closer to release. On Friday morning, my mother came into my room holding 2 cups of coffee and sat quietly at the edge of the bed. "How did the meeting with the lawyer go?" she asked. "Clear. Everything is moving forward." She paused for a moment before continuing. "And Lauren?" It was the first time her name had been spoken in the house since the dinner at the restaurant. "I don't have anything to say to her right now." My mother nodded slowly. "I understand. I just wonder how you're processing that part. She was your friend." That situation was harder to define. Mason's betrayal was straightforward in one sense. He had broken the commitment of a marriage. There were legal definitions for that, procedures to follow, and formal steps to resolve it. Lauren's actions were different. She had sat in my living room while I poured her tea. She had allowed me to organize her baby shower. She had looked at my wedding photo while telling me the father of her child was a good man. There was no official process for that kind of betrayal. "I'm not trying to process it yet," I said calmly. "I'm not forcing it." My mother nodded again. "It doesn't need to be solved this week." Later that afternoon, I received a message from Mrs. Han. It was not dramatic or defensive. The message simply read, "What happened was wrong. I will not ask you to understand it. I only wanted you to know that I see it clearly now." I read the message twice. I did not reply, but I also did not delete it. That evening, I returned to the apartment for the first time. Rebecca had arranged a 2-hour window when Mason would be away. Using my key, I walked inside, went directly to the bedroom, and followed the checklist I had written 3 days earlier. Clothes, personal documents, the books I had owned before the marriage, 2 framed art prints I had purchased in my 20s, the espresso machine my grandmother had given me. Nothing else. Everything remaining could be addressed through the legal process. The entire task took about 50 minutes. Before leaving, I paused in the living room. Our wedding photo still sat on the mantel, the same photo Lauren had glanced at weeks earlier. I did not take it, not because it had no meaning, but because it no longer belonged to me. I closed the door behind me and placed the key back in my bag. I was not ready to leave it on the counter yet. The following Tuesday, I found a new apartment. It was a 1-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a small building with no elevator. It was 8 blocks from a new job I had recently accepted and about 20 minutes from my parents' house by train. It was modest, affordable, and entirely mine. I signed a lease that same week. The job opportunity came first. During the 6 weeks when I was quietly preparing for everything, I had updated my resume, contacted former colleagues, and applied to several positions Mason knew nothing about. Before marriage, I had studied design. Over time, I had shifted to working from home because it had been more convenient for Mason's schedule. In the interview, they asked why I had stepped away from the field. "I'm ready to return," I said. 4 days later, they called with an offer. I started the following Monday. The first month was busy in a practical way. New systems, new clients, unfamiliar expectations. But it was a type of challenge I could handle. It required focus rather than emotional strength. My supervisor, Carla Bennett, was organized and direct. She communicated clearly and did not waste time. I respected that approach. The same week I signed the lease, Rebecca called me. "He agreed to the main terms," she said. "The apartment will remain yours, along with the joint account. However, he has already moved some money." "Of course he did," I replied. "It isn't enough to affect the case, though," she continued, "but it is documented." Then she asked something she had not asked before. "How do you feel?" "Ready for it to be finished," I said. That night, I went shopping for my apartment. I walked slowly through the store, choosing items without considering anyone else's opinion. Sheets in a color Mason would have called impractical, a small rug, 2 plants I wasn't completely confident I could keep alive. On the first evening in the apartment, I sat on the floor because I had not purchased a couch yet. My back rested against the wall as I looked around the empty space. There was nothing dramatic about it. It was simply quiet. But for the first time in months, the silence did not feel uncomfortable. It felt like space. The couch arrived 2 weeks later. I did not choose it alone. During those 6 weeks of planning, I had enrolled in an online design course. That's where I met Vanessa Cole, a graphic designer who was 35 and had been living independently since she was 28. She spoke about that choice with confidence. We met for coffee before going furniture shopping. I explained a brief version of my situation: divorce, new job, new apartment. She did not treat me like someone fragile. She simply nodded. "Rebuilding feels uncomfortable. That doesn't mean it's the wrong direction." She accompanied me to choose the couch. We discussed fabrics and colors for nearly an hour. At one point, I caught myself thinking, Mason would not like this color. Then I corrected the thought. It did not matter what Mason preferred. I chose a deep navy couch, structured but comfortable. We assembled it ourselves. The first attempt was uneven, so we adjusted it again. Then we ordered pizza and sat on it while eating directly from the box. "How does it feel?" Vanessa asked. "Like it's mine," I said. "It is," she replied. The divorce paperwork was finalized 5.5 weeks later, sooner than expected. Rebecca called on a Tuesday afternoon. "He signed everything," she told me. "There will be no more delays." "How did he react?" I asked. "Calmer toward the end. I think he realized there wasn't much to challenge." I thanked her and ended the call. I did not cry or celebrate. It felt more like finishing the process of cleaning a room that had been disorganized for years. Not happiness, just order. Work soon became more demanding. In May, Carla assigned me my first independent project, a mid-sized office renovation downtown. The timeline was 3 months with a 4-person team reporting to me. The first week was intense. I made a few minor mistakes, which Carla corrected efficiently. By the 3rd week, the client approved our design plans without requesting changes. One Friday evening, Carla stopped by my desk. The client asked who was managing their project. I asked, "Is that a problem?" "No, they said you respond faster than anyone they've worked with." It was a small compliment, but it meant more to me than I expected. I began visiting my parents every Friday evening, not because I needed support anymore, but because I genuinely wanted to. My father always prepared more food than necessary. My mother asked thoughtful questions about work. Those evenings required no planning or strategy. They were simply steady. One night, after dinner, I sat in the corner chair I used to claim as a teenager. I thought again about Thanksgiving. The kitchen sink, the sound of running water, Mrs. Han speaking quietly in Korean, Mason explaining that he needed to handle things carefully so I would not leave with everything. The conversation had lasted perhaps 30 seconds. 30 seconds that changed the course of my life. All because I understood a language he assumed I did not. I learned Korean because my babysitter, Mrs. Kim, believed children should grow up bilingual. She started teaching me simple words when I was 8. By 12, I could hold full conversations. For years, it had simply been a skill sitting quietly in the background of my life, until it suddenly mattered. In early spring, something unexpected happened. Vanessa forwarded me a message from a mutual acquaintance. The woman was asking whether I knew Mason had recently been let go from his company. I did not respond immediately. Later that night, I searched for the information myself. His professional profile had been updated with the phrase, "exploring new opportunities after a transition." I understood what that usually meant. A major project he had been leading had failed during its rollout. A client had ended the contract. His name appeared as the team lead in a short industry article I found online. I closed the page. I did not feel satisfaction, perhaps only a brief sense of confirmation. Mason had always performed well when circumstances were stable. When something collapsed under pressure, he tended to redirect responsibility elsewhere. I had been part of that pattern longer than I realized. Lauren reached out twice in January.
I never responded. By March, the messages stopped completely. Through indirect conversations, I later heard that Mason had not moved in with her. They remained in contact because of the pregnancy, but they were living separately. She had to leave her previous apartment and move into something smaller. When my mother mentioned this carefully, watching my reaction, I realized I felt neutral. I wasn't pleased and I wasn't sympathetic either. I was simply aware. One afternoon in April, I received an email from a name I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You don't know me, but I think we share a past." Her name was Elena Brooks. She explained that she had dated Mason 2 years before he met me. She said it had taken her several weeks to decide whether to contact me. She wasn't looking for anything, no drama, no alliance. She simply wanted me to know that what happened to me hadn't started with me. We met for coffee the following week. Elena was straightforward and calm. She explained her experience in about 20 minutes. The details were different, but the structure was the same. Mason managing appearances carefully, Mason shaping the narrative, Mason leaving when it suited him. "I'm not telling you this so you hate him more," she said. "I just wish someone had told me I wasn't imagining things." I already came to that conclusion, but I appreciate you telling me. A week later, Elena mentioned that there had been someone between the two of us, another woman named Rachel. The three of us met one evening at Elena's apartment. It wasn't emotional or chaotic, no raised voices, no anger, just 3 women comparing timelines and filling in missing details. By the end of the evening, the pattern was clear. What bothers me most isn't that he lied, it's how organized he was about it. "He's less organized now," I replied. They both looked at me. He lost his job in February. No one celebrated the news, but no one pretended it meant nothing either. In June, Carla called me into her office. We secured a new client, a Korean hotel group expanding into the U.S. She paused before continuing. "They want someone who can coordinate directly with their team in Seoul." I blinked in surprise. "You listed Korean on your resume?" "Yes," I said. I had added it almost as an afterthought. "Would you be willing to travel?" she asked. "Yes," I answered before she finished the question. 2 weeks later, I was on a 14-hour flight with a folder of project materials in my bag and noise-canceling headphones over my ears. When I landed in Seoul, it was early morning. The team there greeted me formally, a director, 2 architects, and a local coordinator. When I greeted them in Korean, the director's expression slipped slightly. "Your Korean is strong," he said. "I grew up in Koreatown." The meetings were structured, efficient, and direct. There were no hidden meanings or subtle tensions. Everything was clear. I worked well in that environment. On the second weekend, I walked through a quiet neighborhood filled with traditional houses and narrow streets. I sat on a low wall for a while and checked my messages. Vanessa had sent a photo showing that one of my plants was still alive. My mother sent a picture of dinner at home. There was also a message from Mason. The preview read, "I know you don't have to respond. I just wanted to say..." I deleted it without opening it. Not out of anger, but because I was clear about one thing. There was nothing in that message I needed. I looked around at the rooftops and the steady rhythm of the city moving around me. That Thanksgiving conversation could have broken me. Instead, it redirected me. The language I had learned as a child, something that once seemed incidental, became the reason I understood the truth before anyone could present it differently. On the flight home, I opened a notebook and wrote 3 goals for the next phase of the project. Then I closed it, leaned my seat back, and for the first time in a long time, I slept without replaying any conversations in my mind. When I returned from Seoul, my apartment felt different. Not larger, not newer, just more aligned. I unpacked slowly. I placed the ceramic cups I had bought in Insadong on the kitchen shelf. I watered the 2 plants that were still alive, which felt like a small victory. Jet lag kept me awake the first night. I lay on the Navy couch instead of the bed, scrolling through emails from the Seoul team confirming the next steps. There was no message from Mason. That absence felt intentional. In the weeks that followed, work moved quickly. The hotel project entered detailed planning. Twice-weekly late calls with the team in Korea became routine. Floor plans, materials approvals, budget adjustments. The work demanded focus, and I gave it my attention. Structure felt good. Clear expectations felt good. One Thursday evening, Vanessa came over carrying takeout containers and a bottle of wine. She sat cross-legged on the couch and looked around the apartment. "It feels settled now," she said. "It does," I replied. She studied me for a moment. "Are you really okay?" I thought carefully before answering. "I'm not broken. I'm adjusting." That was the most accurate description. Some nights were still quiet in a way that pressed gently against my chest, not painful, just noticeable. Sometimes I missed the idea of partnership, the routine of shared meals, the sound of another person moving through the house in the morning. But I didn't miss Mason. That difference mattered. In July, I saw Lauren for the first time since the restaurant. It happened in a grocery store. I noticed her before she noticed me. She looked exhausted, heavily pregnant now, standing in front of the cereal aisle as if she'd forgotten what she came for. For a moment, I considered turning around. Then she looked up and saw me. Her body stiffened slightly. We stood there, under the fluorescent lights, 2 women who once knew everything about each other. "Hi," she said. "Hi." There was a pause. "How are you?" she asked. "Busy. You?" She nodded slowly. "Tired." I didn't ask about Mason. She didn't mention him. "I'm sorry," she said, eventually. Her voice was quieter than I remembered. I studied her expression. I believe she was sincere, but sincerity doesn't rebuild trust. "I hope everything goes smoothly," I said, referring to the pregnancy. She nodded again. We didn't hug. We didn't promise to reconnect. We simply walked in opposite directions. When I reached my car, I sat behind the steering wheel for a minute before starting the engine. The meeting hadn't reopened anything. It only confirmed what I already understood. The version of our friendship that existed before Thanksgiving was gone, and neither of us could pretend otherwise. In August, Rebecca emailed me to confirm that the final financial transfers had cleared. Everything was officially separated. No shared accounts, no shared property, no shared responsibilities. A clean break on paper. Around the same time, I received another brief message from Mrs. Han. "My son is struggling," it said. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I only hope you are well." I read the message twice. Then, for the first time, I replied, "I am well. I hope you are too." Nothing more. It wasn't reconciliation. It was closure. Work continued to grow. One afternoon, Carla called me into her office. "The Seoul team requested you specifically for the next phase. They trust you." I felt something settle quietly in my chest. Trust, a word that felt complicated months earlier, now felt professional, earned, and clear. "I'll take it," I said. That fall, the project was mentioned in a small industry newsletter. Nothing dramatic, just a photo of the redesigned office space and a short paragraph about coordination between international teams. My name was printed correctly. My parents clipped the article and placed it on their refrigerator. Vanessa sent me a screenshot with 3 exclamation points. I didn't send it to Mason. The thought didn't even occur to me until later when I realized it hadn't crossed my mind at all. One evening in October, I sat on the Navy couch with a cup of tea and thought about the woman I had been that previous Thanksgiving, standing at the sink, hands shaking, face calm, listening. She could have confronted him immediately. She could have shouted. She could have packed a bag and left without a plan. Instead, she stayed still enough to create one. I didn't admire that version of myself, but I respected her. She chose clarity instead of chaos. In November, almost exactly a year after that Thanksgiving, I heard through mutual contacts that Lauren had given birth to a baby boy. I looked at the message for a moment, then set my phone down. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel grief. I felt distance. That chapter had closed. Not erased. Closed. That year, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner in my apartment. It was small, just my parents and Vanessa. I cooked a mix of dishes, traditional American sides and one Korean recipe Mrs. Kim had taught me years earlier, prepared exactly the way she showed me. At one point during dessert, my father looked around the apartment and said, "You built this." He wasn't referring to the furniture. He meant the life. I nodded. After everyone left and the dishes were stacked in the sink, I stood alone in my quiet kitchen, the same kind of kitchen where everything had shifted a year before. I turned on the faucet and let the water run over my hands. This time, they weren't shaking. I understood every language that had been spoken in that room, and more importantly, I understood myself.